I'm Kristen Ludlow from NBA Inside Stuff, and you're listening to the Double Clutch Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Double Clutch Podcast. I'm one of your usual hosts, Mike Miller, and tonight I'm joined once again by the one and only Mr. Joe Hulbert.
Hi there, Mike. Long time no pod.
Well, yeah, okay, you dropped me in it right from the start. I was going to get to this, but we did record a pod the other week, a whole 90 minutes of podlicious entertainment, and my microphone cut out partway through. So from about 20 minutes in to about an hour and 6 minutes in, there was no audio from me. So that is entirely my fault, and I hang my head in audio shame.
Shame.
Shame. And someone else on the line, as you can hear, a man who needs no introduction, so I'm not going to bother.
Thanks, mate.
No, I'm joking. It's Mr. Hugh Hopkins.
Hey-oh, you all right, fellas?
Yeah, I'm good. You okay?
I'm doing grand. Thank you very much. Absolutely grand.
Good. That's good to hear, because a lot of people aren't this time of year. So let's start there. So we're in the dog days of the NBA season. We're post All-Star, which for some people is a bump. For other people, it's just oh no, not again. And we're pre-playoffs. I know that I think I'm right in saying that this is the same for Hugh. We're not particularly big fans of this time of the season. But Joe, it's your favourite time of the year, isn't it?
Yeah, I really like this time of the year because you see what teams are made of. I also kind of like on some of the worst teams, you start seeing them play their younger players, so you get a look at them and you can get a bit of hype around them. But I've really enjoyed the race for the lower playoff seeds in the Eastern Conference. And to some people, I think the race is a bit depressing because, in honesty, not many of the teams that are actually competing are that good, but they're fun. They're going for it. They're going all in, and that's what I like to see when I watch basketball.
I think that's a great place to start, actually. We had a listener question. We had a few for the last pod, which obviously we answered the first time round and will now answer again here, which might be a slightly different spin. But from Mikey Clark, he asked, which two teams make the Eastern Conference playoffs out of the Nets, Heat, Hornets and Magic? Who wants to take that?
Go for it, Joe. I'm nervous about my answer.
So on the Lost pod, I said Nets and Magic, but the Magic have dropped some really stupid games lately, as Mikey will know as a Magic fan. They lost to the Grizzlies, for example, which just should not happen. So I'm actually going to revise it to the Nets and the Heat. The Heat are 7-3 in their last 10, and Eric Spoelstra will probably get to the Heat. Actually, we probably won't get to the Heat today, so I'll go into it. But they've switched their lineup. They've put Bam Adebayo at centre. They've moved Hassan Whiteside to the bench. Whiteside is torching the small. Most benches go small now. He's killing them on the inside, offensively and defensively. But Bam Adebayo is just playing. He's playing so well. I mean, you guys know a fair bit about him, but they've their starting lineup of Winslow, Waiters, Richardson, Olynyk, and Bam has a net rating of 20. And Eric Spoelstra is an absolute magician. So many old school coaches, they stick to their rotations rigidly, but Spoelstra is happy to plug and play, just throws anything at the wall until something sticks. And for me, that's good coaching. So I'm going to stick with the Heat.
Because you've gone Heats and excuse me, you've gone Heat and Nets. Yep.
Yeah, I think the Nets, their offensive profile, they score too much for me to kind of miss out. They're a little bit more consistent as well with their scoring over the Magic.
Also got the toughest remaining schedule for their 10 games in the entire NBA, and 1.5 games ahead. I still think, I think that's a fair shout. Hugh, what were your two that you were nervous about?
Well, that's why I'm nervous, is because I so want the Brooklyn Nets to be going into the playoffs. I think they deserve it, honestly, but they do have the toughest remaining schedule, and I think if you look at the Heat and the Magic, it's not like they're cakewalks, but I don't know, I just think the Heat and the Magic have what it takes to sort of get part, like the Miami Heat, they have been gutting some of these games out. I mean, I know I was in the Slack channel, I was poking fun at Tom Wade, who was really proud of the bench scoring output in Miami Heat's last game. Until I pointed out that actually that just means that you haven't got a very good starting five. But actually, I think their strength is in their depth with Miami, so I've got them as a sort of lock. But equally, I think Orlando Magic, I know they're currently 5 wins back from sort of, sorry, I've mistaken that. They're currently a few wins back, and they are also a few losses back, but I just think they can make it up. They've got, they know their system. They know the Vooch can, really make a big push when he needs to. He's been playing well all year, and I think he can close out the season well. I've got the Miami Heat and the Orlando Magic going through to the top 8, and the Nets falling out.
Okay, interesting. The Magic then, they've been really vocal about how I say vocal. They seem to be the one team that are shouting about wanting to make the playoffs more than anyone else. How big a disappointment is it going to be for the franchise and the fans if they don't make it?
For me, it's going to be huge. I like what Hugh said there about Vucevic. I think Vucevic, though, is both their strength and their weakness. He's been brilliant this year. He's the problem is there's so many good centers that he's not going to make an All-NBA team, but I still think he's had an All-NBA like impact this year. But the problem is that offense is built around him. If you can I know it's not that easy because they've won 33 games, so that's 33 teams who didn't take Nick Vucevic away, but they're so reliant on off-the-ball players to create most of their scoring, and I think if you can take that away and fight through those screens, I think you can stop the Magic. But, as for what you just said, Mike, my worry with this season is if they don't make it, they're just stuck in purgatory. They have a lower lottery pick. Again, I don't think this roster is bad enough to bottom out unless Nick Vucevic gets traded, and that's kind of not a good place to be in. And they've got a very awkward, I've said this a couple of times. They're core players for the future. They're an awkward fit. You've got Gordon, Isaac, Vucevic, and Bamba. That's Bamba, quite frankly, is one of the worst rookies in this class. Now, that's not me giving up now. I'm just talking about his impact this year. We've already seen the problems they're going to have building him. So basically what I'm getting at is, yes, they make the playoffs, but regardless of what happens, they've still got a lot of questions to answer this summer. How you move and reshape that front court, because I don't think it can all work together.
Oh yeah, they've had a loggerhead there for a couple of seasons now, and I've been on the trade Vooch bandwagon for a couple of seasons because I feel like he can't be your franchise cornerstone if you want to win. I'd like to see him turn it over to the young guys, and I realise that means another few more years of. I say few more. I'm going to be a bit more positive. Another couple of years more of losses, but I think I'd rather take that than scrapping for the 8th seed and perhaps missing out. And I get that it would be a huge win for them to make the playoffs, but I've said it before on this podcast, it might have been the lost pod. It's probably one before that as well. If I am deeply concerned that they re-sign Vooch for a ridiculous sum of money and hamstring the franchise going forwards. My 2 picks. I noticed no one went with the Hornets. We're all out on the Hornets then now. Kemba's gone from the playoffs and probably the franchise.
They're just awful to watch. I don't know if you guys have had the displeasure, but they just
yeah.
It's just high pick and roll after high pick and roll. They try and play at pace, but there's no structure to it. They just kind of like charge into the paint. So I am out on them. I'm out on the Wizards. In the Lost Pod, I said to Mike and Josh, I was like, do you want to talk about the Wizards as a playoff team? And I got shut down straight away. They are awful.
Yeah, I'm not even considering the Wizards in this race, to be honest. I think they I gotta give a hand to Bradley Beal. He's killing it. Watching him at the moment is like a man on a mission. But whether it's the loss of John Wall or whether it's just a case that the franchise is just a mess, I think I don't see them doing anything for the next 5 years. I think if if Charlotte are going to get there, they're going to be the easiest out of this current crop of teams that we're discussing. Because like Joe said, they've got no offense. I love Kemba. I wrote about him earlier this season. You guys know I've got a bit of a soft spot for Tony Parker, even though he did just insult the city of San Antonio by leaving last summer. But at the same time, he's actually been really good for Kemba. I think he's taught him how to be a leader. But I think there's just too much in the way for Charlotte to make it this year. I think, also with the going back to Orlando a little bit, they've signed what's his name, Michael Carter-Williams in the past few days. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, but this dude, he was a rookie of the year for a reason.
I'm not having that argument at all. Oladipo was robbed that year.
He is woeful.
No,
he doesn't have. He doesn't have one skill.
I was listening to another show which claimed that Malcolm Brogdon was the worst rookie of the year ever, and I was just like, hold on a second.
Whoa,
I think that was a Ringer podcast, and I said the same thing because I wanted to call them up and say no, Carter Williams was the worst rookie of the year ever, but he was still rookie of the year, and I think he can offer stuff defensively.
What stuff is it he can offer?
He can offer long arms.
A lack of shooting.
A lack of shooting. Like I said, it's all defensive. He's not going to be scoring many points. I just think he's been in the NBA for a few years, and even though he's no good, he's not going to really advance you. I don't think he's really going to. I just don't see him causing so much of an issue that he's going to set the franchise back and lose them games in the next few days,
That is what you want from a 10-day contract, I guess.
The Magic, though, they're already at like a top 10 defense. They've got guys like Wes Iwundu, who is a guy that some people probably never... They've already, I think, got those kind of defensive stoppers. Steve Clifford's a well-renowned defensive coach, but I mean, the other problem I have, if they sign him long-term, one of the saving graces for me of their season was they managed to rescue Markelle Fultz, and they got a terrible player out there in Jonathan Simmons. But
hey, you be nice about Jonathan Simmons.
But if they sign Carter Williams to anything long term, and you obstruct Fultz's development, that's a big lose for me. But again, I'm with you. I don't think this is any more than a kind of, we'll see what he's got. It's only a 10-day contract, so it's not exactly hard to get out of.
I don't see him being there long term, Carter Williams. I think he's just, let's get another body in here. Mainly because I don't think Fultz is going to be playing this season. Am I right in thinking that?
No, he won't be.
So, I think basically they traded Jonathan Williams out. They brought Markelle Fultz in, but equally... that still leaves them down a player, so they need to get a body in. And Carter Williams can do, he can do what Markelle Fultz has been doing for the Orlando Magic since he got there, at least.
Ride the bench.
Well, to be fair, he's not been a net negative yet, which Carter Williams still could be. I don't think I gave my two teams. I think it's going to be... I think the Nets are going to hang on, and I'm going to go with the Heat, and I'm probably going to regret that, mainly because I don't really feel for the Heat at the minute. But that's just me. Let's quickly have a look at the West. Are the Kings done now? They're out of the playoff race. They're 6 games back on the Clippers.
Get them out
of here. So we're happy with the 8 that are there now. It's just jostling for final positions. Okay, so let's leave the West for a bit because we're going to cover a lot of Western Conference teams later in the pod. It is, of course, March, which means in this lull that I mentioned at the start, that is Joe's favourite time of the season. There is also March Madness. If you haven't already, I had the pleasure of going on ESPN's Head in the Game podcast, which released yesterday, Monday, with Jamie Leng and Rachel Stringer. Where we discussed college basketball. It's one of the few times of the year that anyone pays attention to it over here, and it's still not that big a deal. Joe, you're our resident guy. Bring us up to speed with what's happening.
So, Duke are obviously the hottest team because they got Zion, but their floor spacing is pretty bad. No team with I think they're shooting 30.9% from three. No team with that percentage has made the Final Four. I think it's in the last 30 years or so. So you've got them. You've got Gonzaga, who have been to the final recently as well. They've got a great prospect in Brandon Clark, who is, I'm telling you right now, much better than Rui Hachimura. And then you've the team I like personally as my pick, but they are perennial bottlers of Virginia. They lost last year to the 16 seed, which was pretty embarrassing. But Tony Bennett's system, no one wants that. He's the best defensive coach in college basketball, and the brand his team play, it's slow. His offense is almost controversial because it's so. I mean, I like it because I like my X's and O's, but casual fans just think, what the hell is this? It's the slowest offense in the country. They basically just run. Think of a team that just runs ball screens for the entire shot clock. They slow you down, they beat you down. So they're my pick personally, but generally I look more from a prospect angle than a team angle at college basketball.
So in terms of prospects then, you mentioned Duke. They've obviously got a trio of elite players who will potentially could be the first time we see 3 top 5 picks from the same school in Zion, who's so good he's only known by a single name now, RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish. Do you think it's likely that those guys go top 5, all of them?
Barrett will. I'm not sure he should. I think he's... You know how I've got a bit of an agenda against Harrison Barnes on this podcast for his tunnel vision?
Yes.
That's kind of the way I see Barrett. I don't mind that he's a downhill scorer. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I worry that he's going to fall into the Andrew Wiggins trap in the sense that I don't know if he can dribble at a high enough rate and pick out open shooters enough for that play style to really be a deterrent. Cam Reddish is, I think, the most divisive prospect in the draft. I've seen him as high as 2 on a big board. I've seen him as low as 25. I've got him probably in the mid-teens. Again, I think he looks like he's going to be a decent pull-up shooter and stuff like that, but it's whether he actually contributes enough in other aspects of the game. So, yeah, I think the thing is with a player like Barrett, NBA teams always lean towards that. Most NBA teams look at an offensive guy who can turn them around as opposed to drafting like a defensive stopper. So I do think Barrett is going to go in the top 5. I don't think he should. I'm not sure the efficiency is ever going to be there. But as for Reddish, for me, he shouldn't be anywhere near the top 5. But he plays for Duke, and I think players for big colleges historically have been selected well above where they should be. I'm looking at Michael Kidd-Gilchrist.
I think we've had a go at Michael Kidd-Gilchrist a few times this season already, with side eyes for his draft position. Do you guys complete the bracket at all?
Yeah, but it's going in blind pretty much. I'm all right in the later rounds, but in the early rounds, you know there's going to be upsets, but I just can't predict them. Yeah,
well, the odds of winning, I looked this up the other day, 9.2 quintillion, which is just, it's 19 zeros. It's a hell of a lot of numbers.
But don't people put up like £1 billion if you win it though? That's surely worth it just for the punt.
Dollars, yeah. Warren.
Well, yeah.
Warren Buffett did it a couple of years ago. I think that's still going. No one's ever done it, obviously, because the odds are ridiculous. Any sleepers we should look for in the draft, Joe? Is there any guys from smaller schools you think could really shine out in the run to the Final Four, I guess?
A guy to watch. He's not necessarily sleeper from a smaller school, but it's Brandon Clark from Gonzaga. He's, for some reason, people think Rui Hachimura is the better prospect. I don't really know why. The only reason I've seen is that he's bigger, and you can't just draft someone because they're big. That's not. You've got to have some skill to you. But Clark is. He looks like he's going to be one of those sort of flexible, positionless players that you're seeing starting to come around in the league now, and teams are chasing them. I mean, Rob Hennigan of the Orlando Magic was chasing them so much that he decided to reveal it to to the entire NBA world on a whiteboard. He's that type of player. He would have been on Rob Hennigan's whiteboard. He looks like he's going to be an all NBA level type defender, so I'm watching out for him. Another prospect I like again, and I don't know if this will tie into the FIBA World Cup because I might look really stupid and he might not be playing, but I like Sekou Doumbouya as well.
Okay, nice. That's a nice transition as well, because we're going to talk about the FIBA World Cup briefly as right now. Obviously, the draw took place on Saturday the 16th. Did you catch that at all, Hugh? Was there anything interesting that came out of that for you?
Yeah, I follow FIBA a little bit. I mean, the World Cup draw was like hosted by Kobe, it seems, and there's a fantastic picture of him holding up the word Jordan, which just it made for such meme-worthy content with holding up the goat, always behind the goat, that sort of thing, or wishing he was ... Jordan. But yeah, it's it's been a pretty cool to see the international response to it. Actually, I've been working on a few articles, in particular one for France, who's currently the third seed in the world, and it's been interesting following their story over the past few years. Because the USA is not, it's not unbeatable in the FIBA World Cup. There are a lot of really talented teams out there at the moment. Australia is one of them. France is one. There's a couple of others that really do stand a chance of going quite far in the tournament. Spain is a perennial threat, though they've sort of fallen off a little bit recently. But yeah, the draw is out now, and it's worth checking out some of that content, especially because one of our in-house scribes, Nick Whitfield, he's been doing a bit of work on that as well, and he's got the chance to catch up with Kobe and with Stephon Marbury, because he's been a bit of an ambassador for the World Cup, with it taking place in China this year. So it's been really interesting hearing a couple of his stories over Slack, and yeah, it should be a very interesting World Cup this year, especially because the USA have done so well under Van Gundy, who's been coaching the sort of USA qualifying teams, but over the summer it's going to hand over to Greg Popovich, and obviously they're going to bring in all the main NBA guys to lead that team. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. The US went 10-2 using G Leaguers in their entirety.
Yeah.
Which was, that's impressive to me. They've across the qualifying windows, they had 54 different players on their roster, which is just insane if you think about it. They've just got like a 2-window opportunity to either show that they belong or be able to commit to the team for that long. They only had one guy go over 6 games. So what Van Gundy I think has done is really impressive in terms of getting those guys to mould together. And it's going to be interesting to see what final team the USA put out, because if you go on USA basketball.com's or USA Basketball's website, that'll be an easier way of saying it. It's not 1998.
If you go to HTTP,
:// Yeah, so if you check them out, their roster for the senior men's team, which is, I think it was like 36 strong or something like that, 12 of those guys are free agents this summer, so it's going to be quite interesting to see how their off-season decisions affect their availability for September. The NBA itself has pushed the season back bit to start a bit later, and one of the considerations was the World Cup, so it makes me think that they're trying to support USA Basketball as much as possible in trying to put out an absolute behemoth of a team. And in a market like China as well, which is so important to the NBA, they really want their best guys out there and on display. I think it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's great to see a different style of basketball. I think it's great to see guys who are outside the top 500 players in the world, but are still very, 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 very good at their jobs, Some guys earn contracts off the back of it in the NBA, which is great. It should be brilliant. It was interesting you mentioned Nick because he had a humble brag earlier. One of the only players to get brought up by individual name when Kobe and Marbury discussed today's NBA was Jokic, that's a pretty impressive feat to have a legend like Kobe discussing your impact and you being one of the few guys referred to by name. Fair play to him. That kind of gives you, well, not only like is it a massive nod to the Nuggets and their performance this season so far, but also to the standard of player that is coming out internationally, which takes us nicely on to talking about the Nuggets, who clinched a playoff spot yesterday with 13 games remaining. Their last appearance in the playoffs was in 2013 when furious George Karl was coach. They beat the Celtics on the road, which would be more impressive if the Celtics were still sort of last year's Celtics. We're not going to talk about Celtics, but I'm really confused by them at the minute. Did either of you guys watch the game?
Yeah. I thought it was a very interesting game. Some of the Celtics fans in the Double Clutch Slack were saying that it's a bit of a matchup problem. But honestly, I don't see that. Personally, I don't see that as an excuse for the Celtics at the moment. They've got all the different body types they need to be able to perform at a high level. That first quarter when I was watching it, it just shows to me how young both of those teams are in many respects, because so much of it was it was at times it was like watching the under-15s team that I coach, because it was like, okay, I've got the ball, I'm just going to run down the court and go 1-on-4 and try and get a fadeaway turnaround layup to go. But of course it missed, and then the next guy grabbed the rebound and just ran up the court, maybe one pass, and then turn around, fade away, crap layup underneath the basket, and that didn't go. And it just felt like there was a lot of that in the first quarter as they were feeling each other out. And while that's not necessarily an issue in the first quarter, what it does suggest is that they don't necessarily have the sort of patience and the ability to slow down when they need to, and then in the third quarter, at the very end of the third quarter, that was when the Celtics lost that game, because there was a sort of terrible matchup defensively where they sort of let one player get a 3 in the corner. And then Brad Stevens took a timeout. It's a clever thing to do. You got 1.1 seconds left, but I don't know what happened, what the play was supposed to be, but they essentially just threw it out of bounds, a full court pass. And it went straight out of bounds. And then
Torrey Craig scored, didn't he?
Yeah, and Torrey Craig got a dunk on the other end with 1.1 seconds left. Now they could have gone into the fourth quarter 5 points up. The Boston Celtics could have, but instead they went tied, and then the Nuggets went on a 6-0 run. And that, to me, says that they've got no discipline in these types of situations. And it made me think of that first quarter where they were just running up and down without any plan. And it just sort of says, well, that's the time to instill those elements of discipline that you need in a young team where you got Jason Tatum and the rest of those guys, where they just need someone to take them by the scruff of the neck, not necessarily put an arm around them, which I think is what Brad Stevens does,
Yeah, I completely agree with your analysis of the game. The first half was fun. It was frantic, though. There were a couple of turnovers as well where the guard would charge up and then one of the big men would rebound it and they'd immediately give it away, which for me should never happen. But the third quarter for me was where that game was swung. And here was my take on it personally. It was frantic, but I will give Mike Malone credit in the first half. He was getting very annoyed with how frantic it was. In the first quarter, they were very patient when they had the starters in. It was when the bench came in, they started getting a bit more out of control. But in that third and fourth quarter, Denver stuck to their offense. They ran some nice offensive sets. They moved the ball. They would pass up good shots to create great shots. Boston were ill-disciplined. Jason Tatum's shot selection, I'm sorry, it shows that he worked out with Kobe Bryant this summer because it's awful, the shot selection. The fadeaway jumpers are a shambles. I'm sorry. I don't know why people are so obsessed with those fadeaway jumpers. You do it as a last resort. You don't do it with 15 seconds left on the shot clock. And that, for me, is the problem I got with the Celtics. Ultimately, they're still a good team. They're going to possibly get home advantage over the Indiana Pacers. They're high in net rating. But they're so... I think discipline is the right word. The offensive system's very loose. But I think that is the personnel they've got. They've got so many guys who want the ball. They want these isolation situations. Whereas Denver, they run everything through one guy. And they've got a lot of off-the-ball guys. And they've just got a lot of sets where they'll get their guards attacking downhill and things open up. Boston, for me, they don't scheme their downhill attacks. They're reliant on a person going one-on-one. And that was the difference to me. And I think, I've got to say, watching this game, I felt a lot better about picking Denver to do well in the playoffs.
Do you think there's any chance that the push of the pace was a deliberate game plan by the Celtics? Because here are... the Nuggets, they're 26th in pace overall. They like to slow it down. You've mentioned how young they are. The start of the season, they were the youngest team in terms of average age. Is there no, I get that I get what you're saying, that it was frantic and they weren't sure what they were doing, but how are we sort of not giving them credit for, the Celtics credit for trying to set a specific tone here, get a slow team that likes to run through a plodding centre out of rhythm and try and, gas him a bit? Because this isn't like, one of the things I love about this Nuggets team is that they're being given credit for being a good team rather than what we've seen historically anytime that the Nuggets are good, where they've suddenly gone, oh yeah, that altitude, really works in their favour. They can run and run and run. You can't keep with them. And I kind of like that side of it. I don't know. Part of me just feels like I get that it was a scrappy, pacey game, but I don't know. I just maybe I'm giving them, the Celtics, too much credit. I thought maybe they were trying to set a specific tone to target the Nuggets.
I can agree with that, but my biggest problem with the Celtics right now is that if you're playing at pace, you've still got to be disciplined. You've still got to make good decisions. And there are too many players in fact, there's two players who come to mind. I've mentioned Tatum, but Terry Rozier, my God, he is awful. I'm sorry. I want to get a bit more into, because I don't like to just spout out stuff like that and not back it up. But the problem with Rozier is he gets tunnel vision. And I think this scary Terry mantra that's kind of been promoted by him to it, I think he really buys into that. And he really, really believes that is the way for him to play. And I think the risk you have when you play a pace style, and this is why I kind of have sympathy with historically really bad teams have tried to play at pace, but actually you're seeing a couple of bad teams now, like the Cavs and the Bulls, are slowing it down, because I think it makes these young players maybe appreciate the possession a bit more, appreciate that you've got to let things develop and not just charge downhill. And I think Terry Rozier's performance, it's not just last night, I'm not being reactive over one game, this has been happening for a while now, to the point that there are a good number of Celtics fans who would rather have Brad Wanamaker in the rotation. This is, I think he is a symptom and also a cause at the same time of this frantic style of Celtics play.
Well, yeah, they held on to him, didn't they? Because there was talk of them moving Terry because he basically built up a really good stock last year when he performed quite well in that Kyrie Irving role. But I think that's just more of a symptom of more of a result of Brad Stevens, is that he's able to get a lot out of guards, and I think that's my issue with them running up and down is, for example, in the third quarter, there was I think it was like less than 4 minutes left, three minutes, something like that. And it was an out of timeout play, and Smart brought the ball up, so Kyrie was already down the court, and he brought the ball up. He passed the ball off to I think it was Jason Tatum. Then Smart cleared out. Tatum passed the ball to Kyrie, who was coming from the baseline, and then there was like a double stagger screen, and Jason Tatum flashed out to the side and got open for a three if he wanted it, but equally, Al Horford rolled to the basket and got an open layup because the defenders were caught in the middle, and it's that type of play that made everybody sort of really excited about Stevens a few years ago. But I think like that's when the teams are at their best, is because they've got the talent and Stevens just needs to put them in the right position. But because they've got this point guard now who learned under LeBron James to sort of be this undermining, second guessing point guard who's constantly trying to run the team his own way, it sort of takes away from the team's potential. I think it is a Kyrie Irving problem, because there wasn't a problem there before he got there. Everybody was bought into this team concept. They didn't have the greatest talent before, but everybody sort of jumped on the back of their coach and really pushed hard to work out the plays and really execute well. But they don't seem to have that anymore.
No, I saw someone say that their offense is jab step central, and that's certainly what I saw last night.
Yeah, but that being said, I mean, the not to take away from what the Nuggets did, the Nuggets are playing very well, and they do force teams to. They do force teams to play their way. It took a little while. It took until that third and fourth quarter, but it's like we were going back to saying earlier, Joe, is that it's about discipline. They kept their game plan throughout the entire game, and it paid off towards the end.
Okay, so Joe mentioned you mentioned you were more confident in the Nuggets in their postseason potential. I just want to know where you guys think this team is going, because they've done it whilst dealing with. They're tied first in the Western Conference, so I should probably lead with that at 47-22, and they've done it whilst dealing with significant adversity on the roster. So according to InStreetClothes.com, which is a great website, the Nuggets have lost 140 games this year due to injury, which is 8th in the NBA. They've had limited reps for the starting five. They've obviously had IT out for a prolonged period, and they haven't had any games out of Michael Porter Jr. Where do you think this team's ceiling is this year?
I think they can get to the Western Conference Finals. I think one of the things that they've got is their offense is so diverse. They've got the problem they had under George Karl was that they only played one way, and they didn't really run many set plays or offensive sets. It was very much they had a couple of actions they did all over again, and they ran in transition. But this team now, they've got so many ways they can hit you. Everyone focuses on Jokic, but Paul Millsap is a very underrated ball handler for this team. He can attack downhill and find shooters. They use ball screens to get Jamal Murray attacking downhill. And though Murray's had a down year shooting the ball, he attracts so much attention because his off-the-ball movement is so intelligent. But it's the depth as well. I think it was the last pod with you and Matt where you spoke about the best backup point guards in the league. Monte Morris is the best backup point guard in the league. His shooting is just astronomical, and what he does for this team, and he kind of symbolizes why I believe in this Nuggets team. They've got players who buy into the system, and it's not a basic system. They can hit you inside out, and credit to Michael Malone, who has really gone all in on this offense that Chris Finch installed before he went to New Orleans.
So Western Conference Final. Hugh?
Well, I'm going to start off by saying I'm just going to ignore the blasphemy around around ignoring TJ McConnell as the best backup point guard in the league. But I think they do have the potential to get to the Western Conference Finals. But if you were to ask me, are they more likely to go to the Western Conference Finals or be knocked out in the first round? I think I would lean towards knocked out in the first round. This is a team that has never been to the playoffs before. And I think I've said it on a pod previously, but only 2 teams have ever in the history of the NBA have ever gone from being outside the playoffs in one year to winning the championship the following year. It's very hard to make that kind of leap in one season.
Portland and Detroit, wasn't it?
It was Boston Celtics and Portland Trailblazers. Yeah. And I do have a few concerns about that. They do have great depth at point guard. I mean, they've got Isaiah Thomas, essentially is their 5th point guard, and I mean he's basically gonna offer them nothing in the playoffs. I think ultimately because they've just got younger, better talent in a better health situation. So I do feel for him, but they do have a great amount of players at point guard there. However, their defense concerns me a little bit because in the playoffs, everything slows down a little bit and you've got 7 games to work out a team. It's, you can run up and down a little bit and, Jamal Murray is turning into one of the better passers in the league, actually, as a point guard. But, on the defensive end, they will attack Jokic on every possession because a lot of teams... Now they have offensive big guys who can step outside. He can't. He basically doesn't leave the paint. If you get a point guard, separated from their defender in a pick and roll situation, the point guard has acres of space where Jokic just can't get out to him quick enough because he sags off so far and he doesn't have the foot speed to keep up to them. I think if they go against, certain teams like the Clippers, where you've got Lou Williams, who loves that sort of area on the floor, where you've got go against the Utah Jazz, where you've got, why am I blanking on his name?
Donovan Mitchell.
Donovan Mitchell, thank you. Who, again, really enjoys that kind of area. Or even, if you have one of the other teams that we're looking at, I don't think this next set of teams are going to fall that far down, but Oklahoma City, Russell Westbrook loves that mid-range pull-up. San Antonio, we've got plenty of players on the Spurs that love that mid-range. So I'm a bit concerned about their ability to defend when good coaches in the Western Conference can attack that team in ways that they've never really had to deal with before because they don't have the playoff experience to adjust on the fly like that.
I think it'll be interesting because I get what you're saying, but I don't have the same level of trepidation. I don't think. I mean, they're a top 10 defensive rating. That's been their biggest improvement this year. I get that Jokic is a lumbering giant and he's slow to move around. There are mismatches on every team. You scheme to find the matchups you want. I think Millsap hides him a lot, which is great. That's kind of what he was there for. I don't know. I just don't necessarily. I'm not as fearful in their defensive liability as you are, I guess. But if you guys want to read more on the Nuggets, then Jamie Powell's written a good article on Morris and Beasley, the Nuggets' good cop, bad cop duo that no one expected or even knew they wanted. That's on doubleclutch.uk. Mike Malone, though, surely a Coach of the Year candidate. Joint first in the Wild Wild West. The improvements he made, I mentioned the defensive rating. They've jumped from 25th to 10. In offensive rating, 6 to 3. Where are your guys' thoughts on not just his Coach of the Year candidacy, but who the Coach of the Year is?
I've with Malone, he is in my rankings. Obviously, he's third. These aren't they're just basic rankings I jotted down before the podcast, but I actually think the main reason that Denver have gone from a non-playoff team to a high seed. Again, when I say it out loud, it sounds like I'm disrespecting him, but I think Paul Millsap being back is the chief reason that they have jumped that much. They're still running a similar system to they run last year, although I believe they've slowed it down. But Millsap, for me, is a big part of this Coach of the Year case for Mike Malone. My pick, as you know, Mike, I radicalised you and Josh last week, is it's Nate McMillan. He has He lost his best player. I don't think anyone thought they would dive out of the playoffs, but most people thought they would slide down to that sort of 6-7 range. But they've stayed afloat, and he's got Bojan Bogdanovic averaging 21 on 50, 39, 80 splits. And I think the fact that they never had that guy on offense. I know Oladipo's a good player, but for me, what makes him a star is his defensive energy. But I think the fact that they didn't build their offense around one person is why they've been able to transition so seamlessly. And I think the hardship that McMillan has had to deal with has to come into the Coach of the Year race. So he is my pick.
It was a massively empowering speech. I'm not going to lie. But I don't know what it was. So maybe I was caught up in the moment or what, but I found myself sort of retracting from that point. I get that he's been really, 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 really good. But it took one tweet from Kurt Goldsberry to remind me that Coach Bud, Mike Budenholzer, it should be Coach of the Year. He posted this. If you don't follow Kurt Goldsberry already, you really should. He posts some amazing graphics. He's got a book coming out, which I've already got on pre-order and have had since November, and I'm just super excited about because that's the kind of geek I am. But it's his post, why Budenholzer will win Coach of the Year. So it compares last season and this season rankings for the Bucks. 3-pointers made from 27th to 2nd, defensive efficiency from 18th to 1st, opponent restricted area field goals made from 30th to 1st, defensive rebounding rate from 30th to 2nd, winning percentage from 15th to 1st, and I was just like, crap. that's just insane. Just that kind of leap. I totally think that Nate McMillan is completely overlooked in this conversation and should be shouted about more, and is a more than sort of worthy winner if he were to win it. But I've gone back to my Coach Bud stance, and I'm just holding on to his leg like Van Gundy did to Camby in like 95 morning in 95. Hugh, who have you got?
I'm with you guys. I think Nate has done a fantastic job this year. I think the award is actually going to go to Bud for his work in Milwaukee. That being said, my personal preference for this award, which is called the Greg Popovich Award, by the way. My personal preference for this year's Greg Popovich Award is actually Doc Rivers.
It's a good shout.
If you think back in last summer, I don't think anybody really saw them. There was it's always difficult to tell right at the start of the year, but I don't think I necessarily had them making the playoffs this season. And then they gutted the team, but he still managed to put them in a position where they are now. I think they're 5 games ahead of the Sacramento Kings. They're six games ahead of the Sacramento Kings. Like, that's an incredible achievement. I think this is when Doc Rivers is at his best, is when he's working in this development role. He's obviously won a title, and he had some amazing years with the Clippers, with Lob City. But I think this is when he really thrives. If you take one player, for example, Landry Shamet, before he came over, he was a decent off the bench shooter, averaging around 8 points as a shooting guard. But now he's doubled his assist ratio since moving over, because he's played more as a point guard with the Clippers, and his 3-point percentage has increased, and he was already a good 3-point shooter, and he's scoring 12 points per game since he's moved to LA. I think that's that player in a microcosm is what Doc Rivers can do. He is good at recognizing young players' potential and talent, and he's good at nurturing that as well. Obviously not just him, his coaching staff as well. But I think he deserves quite a few votes this year for the Greg Popovich Award. That being said, I think Mike Budenholzer will get it.
I think it's a very valid case. What he's done is phenomenal. I know that we've given him some crap over the years on this pod.
Yeah.
I know that Joe has publicly retracted some of his previous comments that he's made about Doc. It's been an impressive season by no stretch. I kind of feel like Jerry West deserves a hell of a lot of credit again for being once again, the man with the Midas touch. Everywhere he goes, from franchise to franchise, he just gets W's from guys that you don't always think should necessarily provide that. Joe, do you want to say anything on Doc?
Yeah, Doc's done a great job. Having that roster overhauled has really, with the Tobias Harris trade, has really solidified his case. He's been really smart with his lineups. He's flexible, but the main reason this team has been so good is that Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell bench unit, and he has ridden that. But like they're starting Landry Shamet, they're starting Ivica Zubac. What they've done this year is they have found a lot of players who can play alongside stars. But with regards to Rivers, we've mentioned all of my guys on the list, apart from number 5, and it's a name that would surprise people. And this isn't me saying he should be coach of the year, but he definitely has done a good job here. I've actually got Mike D'Antoni written down.
I think
roster.
I think you misspelled Greg Popovich.
Pop has done a good job, but Mike D'Antoni's roster was overhauled in the summer. They signed Carmelo Anthony, which was a disaster. They let Trevor Ariza, Luke Mbamute go. Clint Capella's missed time. They've got Eric Gordon's had a terrible season. They've got Kenneth Faried starting, a guy who got cut by the Nets, and they are the 3rd seed. And he's completely... I know their offense isn't popular because it's just isolation after isolation, but to be able to change your play style that drastically in one season, I think he deserves more love than he's getting, personally. That's the last thing I've got to say on the Coach of the Year race.
Okay, so let's move on from that. Let's go from Coach of the Year to, well, as Hugh rightly said, pretty much the coach of all time. Is he the GOAT coach? Is that just a shepherd?
Yeah. No question about it. Phil Jackson had a hell of a run. Clap for him. But yeah, sorry, it's Pop.
Yeah, Phil Jackson inherited everything though.
Ooh, I mean, maybe that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah. Spurs winning 9 straight and ensuring that Pop has a winning record for the 22nd straight season. The Spurs, joint fifth in the Western Conference, 42 and 29. I remember 3 or 4 pods back now, Hugh, we were discussing the rodeo, the rodeo road trip, which was a disaster.
Yeah.
But I remember being quite stoic in that, look, they've been crap on the road, wait till they get home. So they've gone, 9-game streak includes 2 road games, which admittedly were at Atlanta and Dallas. But that's 7 home games. They have the easiest, almost the easiest. They have the 27th hardest remaining schedule. How high do you think these guys are going to finish?
It's going to be interesting. It depends slightly on a topic I think we're possibly going to discuss later, which is the injury of CJ McCollum. But I think they could get a home court advantage. I don't necessarily feel they're going to win enough games to get past the Houston Rockets. Partly because I think they sort of remaining home and away games I think are pretty even. And as you said, their home and away records are vastly different. I mean, recording, what are we on are we on Tuesday evening now? Their record at home this year has been 29 and 7, and on the road it's been 13 and 22, which is quite a stark difference. I think there's 2 reasons for this. San Antonio has 8 new players on the team this year. They've lost 5 core players who had been with the team for 4 seasons or more. As looking at some of the experience levels of the rosters as well. So not only have they got a bunch of new players in, and it's always really hard to build up a bit of momentum early in the season with a brand new team, but not just that, their experience level is the youngest it's been, or the youngest it's been for many years. If you add up all the seasons and average out how many seasons are being played by this team, it's 5.2 seasons experience under their belt. But then last year it was 5.5. The year before that it was 6.2, and the year before that it was 8.6. So this is one of the youngest teams they've ever had, really, and one of the youngest teams that Pop has ever coached. So,
and amazingly, still the sixth oldest team in the NBA.
That is quite an achievement, but it is still a very young squad. And I think, young teams rarely start out well, but young teams also don't do very well on the road. So I think they have picked it up since the All-Star break. They are doing a bit better. The rodeo road trip was terrible, but the rodeo road trip, Pop has always said that it's a great time to bond for the team. So even if they didn't win that many games, they were on the road together for several weeks, and that gives them a time to, figure kinks out and build up a bit of team chemistry to head into this final stretch run. And, it's worked again. So even though the rodeo road trip wasn't very good, the past 11 games, I think they've lost, one game in the last 11 games? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And, I imagine they'll probably go somewhere around 500, maybe a winning percentage, maybe, in the final stretch here. I think they can possibly get into that fourth seed. If they can get into that third seed, that'd be excellent, because they do have such a good record at home. But I think they're not going to go far. But what they can do is upset a few teams that want to go far in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with them on this run. One of the player who has impressed me most is Derek White. He's I watched in prep for this podcast. I watched the Spurs Warriors game back, and I've watched quite a lot of Spurs games this season. He looks like he's going to be, if he's not already, an all NBA level defender. He had the clamps on Steph Curry a lot yesterday, which is something you don't say a lot. He fights through screens better than any guard I've seen. I think him and Josh Okogie are the best two I've seen this year at consistently doing that. And one of the things that's impressed me in this run is that Pop this year has said a couple of times that he's bored of small ball. He's bored of these 3-point bombing offenses. But their best lineups on this run have actually been the small ones. So the best lineup in this 11-game stretch has been the Patty Mills, Rudy Gay, DeMar DeRozan, Marco Bellinelli, and LaMarcus Aldridge lineup, which has a 25 net rating. And similarly, the starting lineup in a couple of the recent games of Derek White, DeMar DeRozan, Bryn Forbes, Davis Bertans, and LaMarcus Aldridge has also had a net rating of 27. So ultimately, the big thing with Popovich has always been that he uses the most lineup combinations of any coach. But I've found it very interesting to see that their best lineups have been the small ones, even though the Spurs have this rep, even now, of playing more traditional lineups.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to where you mentioned Derek White's defense, because I think that's been the big transition that we've seen, is the team's defensive rating in recent weeks. So when we did the rodeo road trip wreckage recap, the season stats had them 20th in defensive rating, and for that road trip 30th in defensive rating. For this 9-game streak, they're 3rd in defensive rating. It's crazy. The rest of their stuff, in terms of pace, offensive rating, is pretty much bang on par with what they've been for the rest of the season. But they seem to have they're transitioning well ahead of the the prep for the playoff push. Again, I'm kind of with Hugh, as I'm not convinced how far they'll go in the playoffs. And just as a side note, does anyone else still cringe whenever Marco Bellinelli curls off a screen and launches a three? I'm still the amount of years he's been doing it for. Every time he does it, I'm just like, what? What are you? Oh no, it's good. It's fine.
If I ever see kids try to do that while I'm coaching them, I pull them out of the game. Like he would not survive long on my team. But then I do lose a lot of games, so you know.
So you're not quite Pop.
Not quite. No.
Anything else you want to add on the Spurs?
I think just piggybacking on your Derek White comments, both of you. I think when DeJounte Murray comes back next season, that guard lineup is going to be terrifying to go up against. We're going to give, it doesn't matter who it is. I think Derek White did a good job on Curry in that Golden State game, but can you imagine if they've got DeJounte Murray also shutting down Klay Thompson? I think it's going to be a good team in the coming years. It's been a bit of a rough ride for San Antonio fans. I mean, we almost missed the playoffs last year, but it's good to see that Pop has managed to just get the team back on the rails again to just chugging along for another 50-win seasons for the next few years.
I've got to admit, I did fear that this could be the year the streak broke.
Me too. I'm. That's why I think Pop deserves some votes for Coach of the Year this year, because it's the fact that they basically didn't have a point guard for the first third of the season. And because Derek White was injured, DeJounte Murray went down, and they haven't had Lonnie Walker for much of it either. I know he's not strictly a point guard, but they were running out Bryn Forbes, and I've got a huge soft spot for Bryn. I have for the past few years, but he's he's not really a point guard. He's
not a ball handler, is he?
Yeah, and so when your best point guard is Patty Mills, who is a perennial, bench threat for, hitting threes. That's great, but he's not really, he's not really an all-star point guard, which we've been used to for quite a long time now. So it's been an adjustment, but I've got high hopes for the future.
Okay, let's move on to a couple of quick hitting topics then. Malcolm Brogdon is out 6 to 8 weeks with a minor plantar fascia tear in his right foot. So in 64 games, all starts for the Bucks this season, Brogdon is averaging a career high 15.6 points, 4.5 rebounds and 3.2 assists in 28.6 minutes per game, shooting career bests in field goal percentage at 50.5, 3-point percentage at 42.6, which is the only Buck shooting over 40%. He's also shooting an NBA high 92.8% from the free throw line. How big an impact is this going to have on the Bucks, not only maintaining the number one seed, but going into the playoffs, and is it going to have much impact on their ability to perform?
He's a great player. 50, 40, 90 club is something that has generally been reserved for, well, certainly in my time, it's always been guys like Dirk. But for a secondary guard to have that is pretty incredible. 94 percentile spot-up shooter, good transition player. Budenholzer's system, sorry, why have I called him Budenholzer? Budenholzer's system is all about discipline and guys playing within the offensive sets. He does it perfectly. In fact, he probably, along with Paul Millsap in Atlanta, he epitomizes that system. They've got, I think, underrated depth, but when you play Brogdon, I don't think he gives you any problems. He's a good defender. He can shoot. He can ball handle at a level that's good for, let's be honest, the third ball handler behind Eric Bledsoe and Giannis. So they're three options to fill that spot. Now, against Philadelphia, he played Niko Mirotic, so he went big. He went Giannis, Niko Mirotic, and Brook Lopez. I'm interested to see if he sticks with it. He was a negative, but then again, they were against probably the best starting lineup in the Eastern Conference. The other options he's got Pat Connaughton, who's a good defender, He shoots 30% from three, so that's a 10% drop off, which is a lot. But his defensive rating with the starters has been 91, which is pretty outrageous, to be honest. And the other option's Tony Snell. But this is where I'm kind of getting into what they lose with Brogdon. They've got guys who can shoot. They've got guys who can defend. But I think the big thing with Malcolm Brogdon is that he can create shots for himself and others. And I think ultimately that is what is going to suffer with this injury. That's, for me, what they're losing most.
Yeah, I think Brogdon is, over the next few years, he's going to become known as one of the most underrated point guards in the NBA. He is very talented, and he's exactly what they need alongside a player like Giannis, because he doesn't demand the ball, but he can be effective without it. He enjoys setting other players up. I can't get a feel for how much it's going to impact the team straight away. I know it is. Did you say it was 6 to 8 weeks that he's going to be out? That is a fair stretch of time. So I do worry about their their deep playoff runs. I think they're not going to have any problems racking up wins in the final few weeks here of the regular season. But I think they do have other players that can step up. I mean, Joe, you listed off a couple of them, but the team is filled with a lot of veteran guys who are also half decent passers. I mean, they've also got Pau Gasol, who's another big and one of the best passing big men the NBA has seen in recent years. And they've got Bledsoe, who can he's not as cool-headed, I don't think, as Brogdon. He's not as good a shooter, but he is a good defender. He can pass well. So I think there's going to be there's enough talent on the team to be able to pull together around this. But yeah, I think they will need him back if they want to take on the Warriors in the finals. They're going to need someone like him fully at full strength.
I think. Well, I agree with you there. He's a loss, but not one that's necessarily going to. It's not season ending. It's not going to stop them from getting to where they need to get. He is just an incredibly useful, fourth option, I'd say, at the starting lineup. Joe, you mentioned the 50-40-90 club. He's guaranteed himself in joining that club by the fact he's going to miss the rest of the regular season. So it's only been done 13 times in NBA history. So he's joining some elite competition. I think Steph's had a couple. KD had one, definitely. Then Dirk's a standard member of that club.
Just one thing before we do move on. Like I know he is a fourth option, but Rajon Rondo was a fourth option for that Boston Celtics team that won with Ray Allen and Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, but really he was the difference maker. So fourth options can be difference makers when it comes to those big games,
Sure, but Rondo was also the primary ball handler, whereas Brogdon is not. He's the tertiary. He's not running the offense. He is a useful off the ball player. I think their usage is different, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point.
Let's move to another undersized guard, probably one who has a higher impact on his team. And that's no disrespect to Malcolm Brogdon, which sounds like it was. And we've already defended that slanderous comment made on the Ringer podcast that you were the worst rookie of the year, because you were definitely not. Let's go to CJ McCollum, who has a popliteus strain in his left knee. Some of these parts of the body that
they're
are
making
out
it
these
up.
days.
It's not real.
I know, it's ridiculous. So he suffered in Saturday's loss in San Antonio. I read this and I was like, well, maybe they've made it up because it was against the Spurs. He's suffering from popliteus. He's going to be assessed again in a week. He missed the win over Indiana. He's averaging 21.3 points this season, 4 rebounds, 2.9 assists, 46, 38, 83 are his splits. Secondary scorer for the Blazers. This is probably a much bigger loss then. What are you guys' thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this is pretty bad for Terry Stotts' perspective. Sorry, Mike, I'm going to bring up the playoffs last year again. But the big problem they had in the playoffs last year was that Stotts' hands were very tied by the personnel. You take CJ McCollum out of the picture now, and yes, I will say this version of not Nikola Mirotic, Jusuf Nurkic is a lot better than the one they had last year. So much that they actually ran a lot of the offense for him last night in the 8-point win over Indiana. But I think Stotts' hands are even more tied. He played Jake Layman. I follow a lot of Portland fans because I covered them for about 6 months, and he's a bit of a meme with the Portland fans. I don't know why they find him funny. He started yesterday. He had 0 points in 18 minutes. Now I know there's more to basketball than scoring points. Okay, you can theoretically put up 0 points and still have impact in other areas. But for a Portland offense that has what the big problem they had last year is that their guys, certainly Aminu and Harkless, went so cold from 3-point range. You take McCollum out of that and you replace it with Jake Layman. They simply need Layman to make. We're not just talking a small jump. We're talking a monumental jump, and I just don't think he has it in them. I think Portland are going to slowly. I don't think they're going to tumble down the playoffs to the 8th seed or anything like that. I see them losing their home court advantage quite comfortably at this point. I just don't think there's enough dynamism outside of Damian Lillard. I mean, they ran a lot of the offense through Nurkic yesterday. The results were mixed, in my opinion. I just didn't think. One of the things I like about Portland is the constant off-the-ball action. When you're running it for a guy like Mirotic, I just don't think you've got that thing that has made Portland such a threat for the last couple of years. So it's not a hot take to say it's bad, but I'm worried because I just don't think Stotts has the pieces to even remedy this in the way that I think Mike Budenholzer does in Milwaukee.
I sat patiently through that. Excuse me, Jake Layman slander there.
Go get him, Mike.
He's a springy, athletic wing who, I'll have you know, for at least 2 weeks last season was leading the league in points per 36 minutes. So there is a very good reason why he's popular with the weirdos that follow the Blazers. No, in all seriousness, if this injury to McCollum becomes something longer than a week, I mean, they've got 11 games left, I think 12 games, then you are going to see them slide because they can't handle it. I've said before on this podcast how the scoring distribution on that team is far too lopsided for me to be comfortable with it. There was a point where I think about 60% of the points were accounted for just from Dame and CJ last season, and that's just too overly reliant on some undersized guards. In their favour, they've got a relatively easy run towards the end of the season. They've got the Nuggets twice, and then the Pistons twice, and the Nets. They're the sort of harshest competitions, and then they get to pick amongst the scraps of the Bulls, the Hawks, the Grizzlies, and the Mavericks as well. But yeah, if this starts to become a 2-week issue or longer and into the playoffs, then I start to become very concerned because there just isn't enough talent on that team to do any damage, in my opinion. We did have a question from Scott Johnson on the Blazers. Do you think the Blazers make it past the first round of the playoffs? I realise that this question is slightly loaded because it will be dependent on CJ McCollum's health and obviously their final positioning, but do either of you have them making it out the first round?
If the playoffs started today, they're
the 4 seed and they'd be facing the Spurs.
Yeah. So I don't wish to make light of CJ McCollum's injury or any player's injury, but I hope he doesn't make it back because if they are the 4th seed and the Spurs end up playing them in Portland for those first 2 games, McCollum scored around 27 points per game in Portland against the Spurs this year. Both of them were wins, and he was a big reason why why the Spurs didn't get anywhere close to winning against them this season in Portland. However, he did score just 17 points per game against the Spurs when they played in San Antonio. So I'm hoping that you guys lose a few more games while he's still recovering, and I hope he can be back in time. But I do not want to see the Spurs go out in favor of the Blazers. That being said, I hope he comes back healthy, because actually I think I haven't broken down the shot distribution numbers like you have for this season, but I think the eye test tells me that this year's team is so much better than last year's team. Whether that's because of Nurkic improving so much, or whether they're deeper with people like Rodney Hood, I don't really know. But I think they do have a much better squad, and I think they fully healthy. I think they could make a bit of noise and maybe even contend for a Western Conference playoff spot. I don't have them like Charles Barkley. I don't see them in the finals necessarily, but I hope he comes back healthy, because I think they've got a chance of making some noise.
Joe?
I said no on the lost pod, and I'm going to stick with that. Certainly in wake of this injury, I just think, again, the schematic limitations, they're too much. I know Stotts does a good job. He runs a nice offensive system, but I think with an aggressive pick and roll trap scheme, you can kill this team. But although I will say, not every team in the playoffs has Anthony Davis, like the Pelicans did last year.
Or Drew Holiday and playoff Rondo. Let's just
Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday was big. It depends. I mean, it's hard to answer now because I don't know what the matchup is, but I'm definitely not. Yeah. I'm definitely not comfortable with this team.
So I'm just going to come back to you, Hugh, because you danced on it a little bit. Yes or no? Portland winning a first round series?
No.
No. So we've got 2 no's. I'm also a no. I just. Yeah, I agree.
I'm saying that simply because where they are at the moment is against the Spurs, and I don't. It's more heart than head, but I actually think, I actually don't think they would get past the Spurs if it started today. I think it'd be tough to beat a surging team like San Antonio's at the moment, especially if McCollum isn't fully healthy by the time they return.
I'm really keen to see this matchup, actually, because I think the whole LaMarcus Aldridge backstory will make it actually something that's more interesting than it perhaps would have been if he wasn't involved. Okay, so we've got one more listener question. It's from Pick and Roll UK. So Andrew Bogart. Over or under 5 minutes per game in the playoffs for the Dubs. He, of course, made his debut last night, and it really freaked me out watching him because I felt like I was rewatching old footage. Yeah. Just like it was just bizarre seeing him back in the Warriors uniform. So, Joe, over or under 5 minutes per game in the playoffs?
If you're excluding garbage time, I'm going under. I just don't know how he can hang out in space, which is the way that playoff bigs are being asked to defend now.
What about if we are including garbage time? Because I've got a feeling there might be some garbage time for the Warriors.
Yeah,
maybe not necessarily against the Clippers.
If you're including garbage time, I'd take just about the over, but I don't think he's going to play many meaningful minutes.
Sure.
I'm taking the over because I don't know how many minutes they're going to be able to play Boogie Cousins. So I think Steve Kerr is going to be looking around for something. I know you've essentially got a poor man's Boogie Cousins by putting Andrew Bogut on, but I think...
I can't believe you just made that comparison. I think even poor man's Boogie Cousins is a stretch, but although this is shell of Boogie at the minute.
I just think, I don't know... Kerr obviously brought Bogut over for a reason. He knows everything that Kerr likes to run. I think you could put him out there with an old lineup in terms of without Durant, without without Boogie. Put him out there with Draymond and Clay and Steph, and they can run some old elevator doors action where they basically have someone running through a screen of two players who just close up the moment that Curry sort of passes them by, and then it shuts off his defender from them, and they can run some of those old actions. I think he's still a good rebounder. He played well in the Australian league. He can still contribute. I know the NBA is is leagues above the NBL over in Australia, but I think he still can be a decent player, even if it is just going out there getting a few fouls when they need him to, grabbing a few rebounds and occasionally contributing. It's not going to be very often they call his number on offense, but he can probably still hit a hook shot, and get an offensive rebound or two, because he likes doing that dirty work, and that's something that DeMarcus Cousins doesn't like doing so much. So I think he's going to be useful.
I'm going over as well. I don't think he'll average 5 minutes per game in the finals necessarily. He was unplayable in the finals previous years. But I think in the earlier rounds, I agree there's a DeMarcus-sized hole that we don't know how much he's going to need to fill. But in less than 20 minutes last night, 7 points, 7 rebounds. His passing was decent. He was solid, just all over the floor. He's a big body. He knows the offense. I think over in the earlier rounds, but basically unplayable the minute anyone wants to go small. I mean, he is the reason why the death lineup was so good, because he wasn't on the floor.
Yeah.
And Iggy was. So, yeah. So I'm going over for that one. That brings us to the end of the show. Have you guys got anything you want to cover before we leave?
No. And unless you're looking for a game of the week to watch this week, I can pretty much.
Sure, why not? Thank you for reminding me. Let's go with the game of the week. What have you got?
I can pretty much guarantee that the Spurs versus the Houston Rockets is going to be a very enjoyable game. That's on Friday at midnight and it's going to be interesting, because that game could actually decide some playoff seeding implications between the two teams. And if the Spurs win, currently the Rockets have won 2 games and the Spurs have won 1 game this season, but that would tie up the season series for the All Texas Championship, and it would have to be decided in the playoffs, which I like the sound of that.
Fair enough. Joe, what have you got?
I've got Spurs at Celtics on Sunday night.
Okay, that's another good choice. Was that 11:30 on Sunday?
Yep.
Okay, so that's Spurs Celtics. My choice is on Sky Sports Arena, 11:30 p.m. on Friday, and we'll see the Thunder and the Raptors. I like it because it's just going to be two teams who are not the top of the conferences, but have high expectations going forwards. That should be another good one. So they're the 3 games of the week for you to check out. Thank you very much for listening. As always, if you're not already following us, we're on all social media platforms at Double Clutch UK. You can email us admin@doubleclutch.uk, and whatever you are listening to this pod on right now, go and give us a review. We greatly appreciate them. It helps sort of spread the word, everything like that. I've been Mike Miller. You can find me at MikeMiller_time. Joe Hulbert is at HulbertJoe, and Hugh Hopkins is at Coach_Hugh. We've been the Double Clutch Podcast. We'll speak to you next time.